Good evening and welcome to Courageous Conversations. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Hosted by the Psi Iota Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I now introduce to you our moderator for the evening, Boston Globe's very own columnist, Jenee Osterheldt.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here and having me tonight. I am so excited to be in conversation with Brandy, Fluker, Oakley, and Bithiah Carter and Michael Curry. Courageous Conversations is such a special place for us to hold space for one another and to be in conversation. We're going to break out into small, intimate groups for virtual real talk conversation. The purpose of the breakouts is to be engaged and honest and open and unapologetic, but also graceful with each other. You'll be split up into small groups for 20 minutes to discuss the following questions. Each room will have one of our distinguished panelists and one of the pretty girls in pearls as well. So the breakout questions are up on the screen. What are your thoughts about the insurrection that took place on January 6th, i.e. the white terrorism? Are you aware that the root cause is due to the election results? Was it us Black people that got Biden elected? Plot twist, yes. Can Black people breathe now? Will we ever be able to breathe? What does Madam Vice President Kamala Harris need to make her focus over the next year, over the next 4 years? And most pressingly, immediately, what do voters need to think about over the next 2 years leading up to the midterm elections? So these are the questions you'll be talking about with, amongst yourselves, and then we'll come back and share. Please elect one member in your breakout room that will be sharing when we return in 20 minutes.
Give us a moment and you should be seeing something that's directing you to join a breakout room.
I was going to join, it had up there for me to go to 3 and then it went down.
Give it a second.
Okay, yeah. Have Morgan bring it back up.
Thank you, Gwen.
Oh, sure.
You know, Zoom doesn't pay us to be doing tech.
Let's see. If not, it might be just me and you talking, Nancy. What was some questions?
I guess we are in the same room.
This is not the one of the rooms. Hold on.
Okay.
Yeah, no. Because you initially said, Morgan, for me to join breakout room 3,
okay.
And then when I cut my mic on, it went away.
Oh, I see you. Hold on. All right, you should. Okay, yeah. Hold on. Try. I just put you in another room.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
Am I supposed to do anything?
No, I think you're. Hold on. All right.
Are we all back? All right, well, welcome back. I had an amazing conversation with room 2. Shout out to room 2. I would love for room 1 representative to step up for a minute and just kind of summarize what your group felt. You got one. I know it's hard, but you got a minute, so represent.
Well, good evening, everyone. I am Nakisha Head, and I'm the representative for Group 1. Excuse me. We had a very lively discussion as well in our group, and I think that it's safe to say that we know that we are not done. That was one of the things that we really, focused on and talked about. We are not done. We did discuss about how we need to become more active in the next election, how who our representatives, who they are and how they play into what we get in this country. We talked about how important that was. We talked about the state of Black America. Like, we are not there. We cannot breathe, as our lovely moderator said. We just can't. So we had such a lively discussion, you all, and I don't want to keep going because I could keep talking forever and ever. But the key point that we did establish, it's not over yet. Our work is not done at all. So if we can just keep that in mind, then we can keep pushing forward. And if anyone in my group want to just say anything else, y'all can shout it out too. Thank you.
Thanks, sis. Group number 2, my group, that means Leanne Dimples, you gonna come represent? Wait.
All right. Yeah, no. So we talked about the same thing. Our group was just as dynamic and lively. One thing we talked about this win was definitely for the culture, right? You think about all the small wins that led up to the big win, which is Stacey Abrams, the flipping that happened in Georgia, the Senate election. We talked about how NEN, that this brought so much pride to the women of Alpha Kappa Alpha. When you went on social media, you could just see the pride in every member of the organization and how her in general, just representation matters. Another thing that we focused on is that, like, we can't forget systematic racism is real, and we still need to hold people accountable and show up, because we know as people of color, we need to do more than just survive, right? Like, we have to create the institutional change that we want to see. We related it back to just the community in general, and we talked about just the average family in the city of Boston was worth $8 compared to our white counterparts at $247. So what are we doing to continue to build Black wealth at every single level, from the school system to politics to nonprofits as well? And that we just have to continue to apply pressure to everyone. So thank you to everyone who participated in group 2. And if anyone wants to add, and feel free, whatever I missed, let me go ahead, jump right in.
Energy. I love my group. Group 3, unless somebody wants to add in from 1 and 2 wants to add in. Group 3, come get your minute. Group 3.
Well, in group 3, we did a lot of talking. We started off with the first question and how people were feeling about that. Some people are still feeling a little scared about that. There was concern about what do you tell your children after this event, and how the differences, the treatment was between when people were out there marching with the Black Lives Movement, and how the terrorists are being treated after January 6th, and making sure they're all held accountable. Then our discussion took off in terms of holding, our officials accountable in the upcoming elections, making sure that they know who we are, what we want, and as well as dealing with some of the stuff that's going on in the schools now, with the Blue Lives Matter flag, and how what that really saying. So we had a very lively discussion in group 3.
I'd love to hear that. Group 4, where you at?
I was facilitating that and totally failed to pick a representative, but we had a very transparent democratic process in the chat where either Felisa or Jackie were voluntold and encouraged to be our representative. So I'm going to go on mute and let them have their minute.
All right.
Oh, okay. So this is Jackie. I'll begin, and certainly Felisa can jump in as well. What we talked about is what we hope for, and then what's the reality. And sometimes, as African Americans, we have to operate in that, in that world. We know that the laws are supposed to protect us, but we also know, again, comparing Black Lives Matter to the white terrorists, the difference. So while we are all hopeful, for the first time having such historic, at least perception of power, that we are really being, just pragmatic about knowing on the ground, what does that look like? Some of the dilemmas for Kamala having to, Vice President Harris rather, having to walk in two worlds. She has to represent as a woman. She also has to represent as Black, and that she's under extra scrutiny. So we just said, like, we're looking forward and optimistic, but we're on the ground kind of just being aware of small things in voting, little changes, the subtlety. So whatever we can do to support her through our own local efforts, we want to make sure that that happens.
Y'all, what a lovely conversation we all have had. I'm so excited about this, and so much love to Group 4 for their democratic process of electing a sharer. I would like to welcome back our panelists. We already have the distinguished Mass State Rep Brandy Fluker Oakley, and Bithiah Carter, President and CEO of New England Blacks in Philanthropy, and Michael Curry, CEO of Mass League of Community Health Centers, NAACP board member, Brockton representative, and Leanne's mentor. So I want to welcome you all back. Don't laugh at me, Leanne. I don't have one, so I got to just make my little corny auntie jokes. I want to welcome you all back and start with one question that each of you will answer, and that is, what inspires your civic engagement? Like, you all play such a pivotal role in the community, so what inspires you to be so engaged?
Bithiah, I'm gonna yield my time to you.
Because I'm quick, and you're gonna get both this time back. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for having me back. Thank you for giving me time. I made my fire a little too hot. Now I'm like roasted. My God, my husband's like opening the door. But I love being Black. I love my community. I think a lot about, first of all, Nakisha's on, and there are a couple of other people that we were talking about being from Mississippi, right? My mother's from Mississippi. And, when I think of people even from the insurrection, you came here in 1900, maybe 1890, my people have been here about 300 years. And so I am proud to be a descendant of enslaved people who, I am doing some work in Hampton Roads, and as I was doing this work, there's this quote that just hit me. Hampton Roads, well, actually in Richmond, we just finished the report Giving Black in Richmond. Richmond was the capital of was the spot for Black capitalism. In the early 1900s, they had 6 Black banks, and the quote was, can you believe it, 1865 were slaves, 1890 were bankers. And I think about that, and that's my heritage, right? That's my people. And so I think about who controls our image, who controls what we're seeing about each other. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And it inspires me to not just think about where I am today, but the legacy that I come from, the people that I come from that made me Black and Black in America. And I can't get but excited about that. And every time and we'll talk again a little bit more about this, every time I do my work, we do these Giving Black reports, and we go back in history to look at who we were, and I'm just amazed. It inspires me, like, I need to be doing more. So it inspires my work every single day, every moment of the day. And I think it inspires my child. and her loving her Blackness as well. And I think that we need to inspire our children more and take back our image from other people who are telling us who we are. We need to go back and understand us and embrace who we really are.
That's why I do what I do. So I
read your columns.
So I love the answer. Before we move on to Michael and Brandy, I'm just so moved in my spirit by Bithiah. I just want to share a quote with everybody. I find in being Black a thing of beauty, a joy, a strength, a secret cup of gladness. That's Ossie Davis, and everything Bithiah just said. Just like take that with y'all, put that in your little spirit pocket for the bad days. Let's continue on with our distinguished panelists.
I'll go next, Michael, and let you have the closing word here. Bithiah, your comments moved me. First, thank you to my sorority sisters for hosting this. Always a pleasure to be in good company with Bithiah and Michael. I feel like the little sis looking up to folks I've admired in this work for so long. And very similar to Bithiah, I have to give homage to my ancestry. I too am descended from enslaved Africans who've been in this country since the 1600s. My dad's side, while he was born in Boston, from Virginia and South Carolina. My mom is from Alabama. Found out at the family reunion that, in fact, my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was a slave born in Virginia who was sold to Alabama, a plantation down there. So hadn't known that part of my ancestry. And I just share that because so often there are folks who want to limit our heritage to slavery only and the civil rights movement only. And we are so much more than that. And there are so many untold stories. Certainly Hidden Figures was a big moment when it's like, oh, we were scientists and mathematicians. Yes, we've been scientists and mathematicians since the beginning of time, since we got here on this earth. Personally, I think to my own family lineage and the land or part of the land we own in Alabama, those 16 acres, my great-grandmother bought that in her name in 1923. So a Black woman landowner purchased it from a Virginia man, white man, and it's not in her husband's name. That's dope. That's badass. That's not something we hear of too often. And so when I think about my mom's story, she grew up in the civil rights movement in the segregated South. She shared her stories with me. She sent me back to my grandparents' farm every summer, so I would never forget my lineage. And the thing that comes up for me time and time again is so often because other folks have tried to write our history, we often try to chase what other people have. And I've just come to learn that we have so much inherently within us that I don't need to chase outside of my community, that the best way I can serve my community is to be a part of it and to give back. And so that's why I've been doing what I've been doing. It's what led me to run for office this past summer. I'm excited to serve in the State House. Was actually sworn in the day of the insurrection, so had huge dichotomy on January 6th personally. And I'm just eager to continue to do the work for my community because I'm not here for myself. It's not about me, but it's about all of us. And I think as we progress through time, unintentionally, we started to adopt the individualism notion that the white man had in this country, instead of remembering that we were always communal. We always looked out for one another. When we think about why we can't get our businesses loans now, because they burnt down our banks when we were taking care of our own. And so it's just so much about our community and giving back that I'm about seeing every Black person win.
Amen. Michael?
Thank you, Jenee. And of course, always an honor and a blessing to be with Brandy and Bithiah. And I've been partners in crime with them for a long time. Bithiah was waiting for me to join her, and it took me a minute, but I'm glad that we finally worked it out. And then others on the call. I think, and Bithiah's heard me say this before, you know, what brought me to this work was the fact that I grew up in poverty. My mother was a single mom. She was one of those mothers that, like Elizabeth Wilkerson's book, moved up from Alabama for the warmth of other suns, from the Jim Crow South, moved into poverty in Boston, was a housekeeper, raising white children and feeding their babies. And we saw her early in the morning when she left and didn't see her again when she came home. We were latchkey kids in a housing project. Older sister became a crack addict. Uncles were locked up in jail, spent weekends going to visit them at Walpole and Norfolk. And cousins and uncles dying of diabetes and cancer at a higher rate. Getting stopped by the police as a young kid. I was in the community and couldn't make sense of all this. And then I would go visit family in Rochester, New York, or like Brandy, go spend summers in the South with family, and I would see the same things. And then I'd turn on the TV and see the same things in other parts of the country. And you're African-American in this country, despite all those great examples. Your mind can't wrap itself around, why are we in these same circumstances in Southside Chicago, St. Louis, North Minneapolis, LA, Miami, North Charlottesville, North Carolina. No matter where you go, Black people were struggling and dealing with these same circumstances. So I'm frustrated, I don't understand it all. And then I get on a college campus and I got some sisters on campus who beat me up on my lack of consciousness about Black history. And I say sisters, because I think for many of us brothers who came to consciousness, it was a Black woman on a campus that beat us up and made us come to the meeting, that made us read the book, that made us come to the panel discussion. And within a year of some sisters mentoring me and beating me up, I became president of our Black Student Union in campus. And I say all that to say that, unfortunately, we don't have a sense for our circumstances. And that goes back to the history conversation. We need to make sense of how we got here. And if you know how we got here, and if you know that unfiltered story, then it'll make sense why there's a wealth gap, because you'll know about redlining and go back to slavery and say the absence of delivering on 40 years of rule, or debt peonage, or go forward with redlining, the GI Bill, restrictive covenants. There's so many key factors in history that kept us from building wealth, retaining wealth. If you want to talk about our health disparities, you got to talk about up through the 1960s, we couldn't even get our care at the same hospitals they could. We were in segregated hospitals. And as they matriculated, Irish, Italian, because they were segregated as well, as they got here matriculated in the front doors, Black folks who had been here since slavery still couldn't get in the front door. So what did that mean? That mean that people like our grandparents and our parents got their medical care in the ER. So it took me all this awareness raising in college to then decide that I need to go back to Roxbury, because I didn't want to come back to Roxbury, to be honest with y'all. I wanted to go somewhere with more Black people. But I decided to come back to Boston and make this my place to do this work because I felt so convicted. I'll end it on this. I posted a message earlier on Instagram that people responded to. And I said, I'm glad people are so woke and I'm glad people are waking up, but some of us are insomniacs. And that's real. Some of us live and breathe this racial consciousness thing, like Brandy, you and I talk about all the time, and we can't go to sleep, even when we want to go to sleep. And I leave you with this concept that Bithiah has heard me talk about all the time, which is the weathering effect. The weathering effect was when they went in and asked Black parents to rate their kids' asthma from 1 to 10. They asked mothers like my mother, what is your asthma? Because I had asthma as a kid. And the mothers rated that asthma like 3, 4s, and 5s. Then they came in, the doctors came in and evaluated those same kids, and they were 8, 9s, and 10s. And they introduced us to the concept of the weathering effect, that you can get so used to being in the ER, like I used to be, at Boston Medical Center, Boston City Hospital. You can get so used to doing the pump all the time that it becomes your normal. So are you weathered to getting stopped by the police? Are you weathered to not getting credit? Are you weathered to getting not hired or fired or not paid the same? Are you weathered to them asking for your ID with your credit card when they didn't ask the white folks in front of you? Are you weathered to our economic conditions and poverty? Are you weathered to the fact that your uncles and aunts, almost certainly on this call, have more comorbidities before a pandemic and are at more risk during a pandemic? We've gotten so used to we've gotten so weathered to how we're treated in our circumstances that we don't even think about it anymore. That is why I do the work that we do. I want to be part of that insomniac crew that's just waking people up to the truth.
Well, and it's to your point, it's that weathering is like what Du Bois talked about. It's that veil, the double consciousness, and it wears you down. And also in a country that's always telling you you're not in pain. Even our parents, that don't hurt, get up, keep going. It dehumanizes you in a way that allows that weathering. And we don't always see it unless there is an insomniac in our life that's like, nah, I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to tell you to take care of yourself. I love this conversation. I love the question, why you do what you do. you know, everything you all said is why I'm a journalist. It's why I do the work I do at the Boston Globe as a columnist, and the space I hold with a beautiful resistance to celebrate Black people, Black joy. I want to go back to Bithiah and talk about, you know, everyone here on this panel does work to empower the people, and Bithiah, your work with us in philanthropy is so strong and special. And as we look at some of the questions we discussed earlier about being able to breathe again as a people, being able to attain collective liberation and freedom, how close do you think we are to that goal? You know, is that an attainable goal?
You know, we had a rich discussion about that in our group, and about what is breathing, right? Is that resting on our laurels? What is that? You know, and especially, and that's why I yielded time, give Mike time to warm up and get spit out his facts. And to that point of weathering, right? And what we think about and how we think through our issues. So when I think about breathing, how can I breathe? When can we breathe? I think when we can breathe is when our children are free. And, you know, we spend a lot of time talking about incarceration, but we don't talk a lot about Black children in incarceration, you know, and Black children in foster care. You know, 25% of our children are in foster care, even though we're 14% of the population. You know, we're 2 times as likely to be in foster care, and we stay longer, almost a year longer, 9 months longer. Incarcerated, our children are incarcerated, right? Even though juvenile placement has gone down almost 60% now, I think, it's us, our children that are in jail, right? Black children, out of 100,000 children, 433 compared to 86 when you're white. When we think about who's in jail, the percentage of children, we're 14% of the population, 42% are Black boys, 35% Black girls, even though we're 14% of the population. These aren't numbers from the past, these are recent numbers, right? And when we look at how we get there, it's not just the school to prison pipeline. We got to think about who's delinquent. 35% of our cases that come up, so they, you know, delinquent cases of youth that are transferred to adult court, 54% of the times, even though we're 34% going in, 54% of the time we go to adult court. White people are overwhelmed, there are more, right? 44% delinquency cases, yet only 31% go to court. So I can't breathe until my children are free. And even though we need to think, and the thing that's interesting about children, we know they're gonna come out of jail for the most part at 18. What are we doing about that? And how do we think about that? You know, Mike talked about poverty, and poverty is real, but I have to go back to he that controls the image controls our mind. 20% of us are impoverished right now. 80% of us are not. So how do we flip that script? And thinking about why do they need us to believe that we have $8 compared to $2.50? Because that's not real. And the Federal Reserve won't even quote that number again. Ask them to quote that number there. What are they selling to us about us? And when I think about what they're selling to us about us, they're selling poverty. What they don't tell you is going back to our strength, right? When we look at from the 1960s, you know, to today, I'm going to start with 1970. 32% of us are impoverished. Now we're down to 20%. White people, 77% impoverished. Now they're up to 10. So that's kind of flipped for them. And I think that's going to some of that insurrection. But if we think of ourselves, okay, we got 80% who are not impoverished. What is the role of that 80% for the 20%? And how are we moving that instead of saying, oh my God, what can we do? These are terrible numbers, looking for someone else to save us. So when we can breathe, I think we can breathe when we control our image, when we control what's being said about our community, when we know, even to what Mike was saying earlier, that we know our history, we are researching ourselves, we're providing the analysis and the recommendations for our community. We can breathe when we're financially free, when we're not paying a Black tax of more interest You know, just the other day I went out to buy a car. I go to one dealer, he's like, yeah, you can get this at 0.9%. I go to another dealer, 2.9. I'm like, why am I paying 2.9? He said, well, that's all you can get. You haven't even, well, you got to have really good credit to get what you, I said, how do you know my credit? And I do have really good credit, and I'm going to pull up Experian and show you what my credit is. So home ownership matters. Access to opportunities matter. VCs, venture caps, private equity, we've got to be in this game to fund our game. You know, Mike talked a lot about health, and Brandy talked about health. We know what COVID showed, but you know what? Black maternal health matters. And Black maternal health isn't just a gateway to what's happening with white people. Sickle cell is another great example. Sickle cell used to receive 10 times less than what cystic fibrosis received for research, for funding, until they realized, oh my goodness, we need to focus on sickle cell because that's a disease of evolution. It shows that we're more evolved, and if we can solve it, it's a gateway to cancer. So how are we using our education system? It's not up to white people to educate us. They can't even educate themselves. So how are you going to educate my child? So we can't breathe until we can control our education. We can control our finances. You know, we are controlling our community. And actually, I think this is a point. So what can we do? It's more than just voting. It's really understanding, getting on boards. It's also those local elections that were mentioned before. It's how you, as teachers, nurses, doctors, what are you advocating for on your job? What is equity? How do you make sure that you're heard? You need to become philanthropic. Jack Connors hasn't run for anything. Bill Gates hasn't run for anything, and they are controlling politicians. You don't have to give to me, but give to Black-led organizations. Money talks, bullshit walks. And that is just the truth. And we have to go back to what are our children seeing about us and controlling that image. So we have to breathe, or start to breathe, for our children's sake. We got to start somewhere, but we cannot take a deep breath and rest because we have a long way to go. You know, we know that there's going to be a backlash to Kamala Harris, just like President Obama. But the question is, how are we prepared for that backlash? What are we ready to do? How are we using our dollars, our philanthropy, our collective will to be ready, and be ready to to take back our own people? 20% of Black men voted for Trump. That's up 6 points, up 5 points. 8% of Black women voted for Trump. What are you thinking? So I think we have to think about our freedom and who we are, and then think through what is it going to take for us to really take that deep breath. Because when we take that deep breath, we have to breathe so that our mind, body, and soul is free, not just a few of us.
And you just said a word that I hope people took notes. Like, everything you said was so important and vital, but I do want to keep you just a little longer because of what you said was so important. And I really could talk about everything you said, but to go back to the children, you know, I never will get over the Georgetown study that revealed, like, the adultification of Black girls starts at age 5, and for boys it's at age 10. And you know, we're seen as less in need of nurturing, more up to no good, more criminalized, even in preschool, suspended, kicked out. And in Massachusetts, Black girls get suspended, I think it's 4 times higher.
That's right.
And can we talk a little bit about, because to your point about some of these things start at home, it is outside imaging and white people, but there's also something I think that happens to kids because of some of what Michael talked about, the weathering, and the, you know, you're not really in pain, or, you know, I was a latchkey kid, Michael was a latchkey kid, it requires some adulting, and I was a latchkey kid in kindergarten, so, and an only child at that time. So can you talk a little bit about that and how we can better serve our children and protect our children in the way of imaging and just their childhood?
you know, and I know Brandy can speak to this as well as Michael. I have an 8-year-old. I think about this all the time, right? I think about my baby. I tell her how much I love her. I hold her. We watch the insurrection together. You know, we have to protect our children and their childhood, even from outside. I'm talking from their teachers. We've got to be, I'm gonna be honest. I am done with people telling my baby she's a leader at 8 and you don't listen to her at 18. No, my child is a child. And so therefore, you don't tell little white kids at 8 years old, you're a leader and you're expected to advocate for all of your rights everywhere. We have to be able to not just protect, but even the imaging that's on PBS about us and how subtle it is. We have to watch those programs with our children. We have to show them their history and demand that the school teach it. And if you don't know how to teach it, I'm gonna give you the curriculum and hold you responsible. And that's one of the things that we did in our school. You may not have the most precious thing in my life and do whatever you want with that child. You may not tell me, at one point they told me my child was nonverbal. And so we went to the school and I'm like, you're gonna prove that to me. I think that this is part, I wanna go back to that piece that Mike said, because it struck me as interesting, the weathering of what happens. How we have to internalize being an advocate, that each and every one of us that is organizing our own household. I don't need an outsider to organize me because I'm getting organized in my house and organizing and advocating for my child. We have to stop this point of when we go to the hospitals, we receive less medicine, or we're relying on a white teacher to be able to show my child. One of the things I thought was really interesting, and I'm sure you're aware of this, Jenee, it was a very interesting article that came out maybe 10 years ago, and it was called When the White Children Came. And it talked about the school that was in South End that was underserving kids until white mothers walked up in there. And all of a sudden, now you're a great performing school. How do we do that? But part of that is getting our image straight about us. We do not have bad children. We don't. We have smart, beautiful, active children because you're supposed to be active. We have curious children. We have children that everyone in the world is trying to sing like and be like. We need to embrace their beauty and see them as children and demand that everyone else sees them as children. And then we're going to bring them up in the space of opportunity, hope, and virtue, because our children know that they are loved. And I do believe we love our children. I just think that some of that weathering and that imaging, we need to tell Tyler Perry, stop that. That is not our community. Stop it. We are not fighting like that. And I have a lot to say about this imaging piece, because I think it's fascinating how hip hop changed from when hip hop first came and I was into hip hop, it was really kind of social conscious roots. And then all of a sudden, Jimmy Iovine was like, we're going to make some more money over here. And it changed the whole concept of how we're seeing ourselves. We can do that. We can change it back. And our children are waiting and listening and wanting us to do that. We are the ones we have been waiting for.
Yeah, Jenee, if I could, and
Yes.
kudos to Bithiah. She always hits the home run and uplifts us with the messages we need. But I wanted to go to something she said, because I think as Brandy, and Bithiah sort of weigh in here, the history matters to me. And I want to make sure we always stay grounded in history. I always say to people, the past is prologue, right? Everything we're going through now has happened before. And if you know it's happened before, you can prepare for it. So I'm going to show you, because I can share a slide. I'm going to show an image. And I want this to tee up this part of the conversation for what I'll say, which is Reconstruction. I call that the Obama years. So think about the official arrival of those slaves in 1619, the emancipation in 1863, and slaves were thinking, those who were able to travel and weren't restricted, which many were thinking, we made it, right? We now are in a period, they talking about 40 acres and a mule. We got Black men at that time ascending into Congress. You'll see there 1865 to 1877, 2,000 African Americans held public office. in that period on every level, including Hiram Revel, the first African-American in the US Senate, right? Way before Kamala Harris. And the reality is there was a backlash to this progress, right? We're talking about the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. And then the campaign started to build whiteness, that we got to build, because we had radical Republicans at this point. So I don't know if people know this history. It was actually Republicans, radical Republicans, who were part of freeing the slaves and leading this moment around Reconstruction. But what happened was, as the Confederates were sort of trying to get back in good with the federal government, there was a compromise made. Abraham Lincoln dies, new president comes in, compromises with those Confederate leaders in the South, and built this notion across the country of whiteness, right? That if you want to be afraid of Black power and Black wealth, because that means that you won't have it. And I'm simplifying this to make this point. The backlash to Reconstruction is the backlash to the Obama years. We should have prepared for it. We should have known that voter suppression was the strategy to get back from the Obama years. That's critical for us to understand, that Black codes and Jim Crow laws, it would take us decades to undo the damage from Reconstruction. And we still haven't undone all those that damage. So I wanted to lift that up and maybe end my point on this. I think it was, and I want to say her name, Miss Claudia Kidd, made a comment when she said 74 million people, over 74 million people voted for Donald Trump. I need that to sit with us for a second. As narcissist, racist, incompetent as that man is, overtly racist, 74 million people voted for him, Bithiah. And they might be your son's teacher, your daughter's dance instructor, or her mathematician, her math teacher, your son's guidance counselor, your employer at work.
Your doctor.
Your 74 million people who are among us condone what that president did. And their policies, their decisions, their actions most certainly show up every day in what they do, even if it's at the store that they work as a store clerk at. So I want us to take that in. We talk about how pervasive racism is in society, that those people are manifesting their racism somewhere right now. That's the battle we have. That's real.
It's in the air. It's in the air. I wrote a column also talking about those 74 million people. Like, the race in this country, it's in the air. If you are in America, you were born into, like, this is a system of supremacy. It was designed this way. And it's like, there's an umbrella and we're all under it and we're a little bit wet. And it's like, we get a little less wet as progress happens, but the umbrella's still there until we destroy that motherfucker. Sorry.
Jenee, can I just add one quick point to what Bithiah and Michael have shared? And I'll keep it brief because I echo everything that they've shared. I also want to remind us, particularly since most of us on this call are here in Massachusetts or other northeastern states, it's so easy for us to say, oh, well, it's not here. And I just want to make sure we are all aware that it is here. I'll never forget when I won my primary back in September, I was meeting with another elected official. My district is parts of Dorchester, Mattapan, Hyde Park, and Milton. And I'm down in this part of Dorchester, and this older white man comes up to me and he's like, congratulations, Rep. I said, oh, thank you so much. We're leading up to the presidential election. He goes on to tell me, and I don't know why, y'all, I'm the type of person, strangers will always tell me their life story. I don't ask for it. I don't say, oh, tell me more. No, they just are like, hey, you look like you'll listen. And as a sucker, I listen. So this white man proceeds to tell me, yeah, you know, I'm a registered Democrat, but I'm an old school Democrat. You know, I don't think Biden's going to make it. I'm voting for Trump. And, you know, and I'm just like, you're really telling me you're voting for Trump? And I'm just listening because I'm at the stage where I have to pick my battles. Like, I can't fight every fight anymore. But it was just so, I just share that because it's easy for us to think that, oh, Trumpism is not here in Massachusetts. It's easiest for to think, oh, it's not here in Boston. And I just don't want any of us to be under that a cloud of disillusionment. It is here in the Northeast. It is everywhere. 74 million goes deep and far and beyond the deep South. And I just have to like double click that because sometimes folks forget.
And Brandy, I'm gonna make it real. 1/3 voted for Trump.
Well, and buses from here went
down.
to the terrorist attack. On top of that, I can show people any number of emails, phone calls, and threats that I get from Northeastern readers. It's definitely pervasive here and everywhere. Any state that is like, oh, we're so blue and progressive, there's an underbelly there. It's still America. Brandy, while we have you, love to see it, Representative. What is it, to your points that you just made, it's everywhere. And now we have Madam VP, and we have you, and we have Cori Bush, and we have, Ayanna Pressley, and so many amazing Black women in office. But what is it that we need to keep Kamala Harris focused on over the next four years, and even over this first year? Like, what are the ways in which we need to hold her accountable to see what it is we want to see?
Thank you for the question, Jenee. First, I have to always say congratulations to my sorority sister on becoming the first Black woman, Southeast Asian woman, can't say it enough, vice president here. And I think, the question is an interesting one, because we know that Madam Vice President is a quite focused and accomplished woman, right? Like, she does not strike me as the type of person who is unaware of the strategy before her. What I think is interesting is that she has the opportunity to be one of the most consequential VPs in a generation. She's serving during major crisis. We have the health pandemic, looming economic issues. She's in a unique position since she'll have a huge role on passing legislation as the necessary 51st Democratic vote on the Senate side. And quite honestly, like any leader, she needs her own clear autonomous objectives, support to achieve those both inside and out of the White House, and a set of overlapping goals with the president. And quite honestly, if I can say so, it'd be helpful to know if Biden is going to run for re-election, because I know I would support Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket personally. She also has to focus on keeping her promises. When she was a presidential candidate in this last cycle, her campaign slogan was "for the people." And over the next 4 years, she needs to push for real progressive reforms within our criminal justice system, economic equity, healthcare access, just to name a few. Also, it's important to note that she is qualified. There is no doubt about it. But like every human being, she has growth areas too, right? And we talked about this in my small group about the double penalty that should she make a mistake, she will receive, because she's both Black and a woman. And so I think it's important that, when it comes time for someone to clap back at Beyonce, the whole Bayhive will go to Twitter and say, not my Beyonce. We need to have a little Kamala Hive, right? Like, whenever they come for her, we need to be at the ready to defend her. Lastly, she needs for Congress to enact the legislative agenda of President Biden without delays, without playing politics, and with the American people in mind. So this country can make progress and dig its way out of the 4-year hole that we're in. And because she's uniquely positioned to be that tie-breaking vote in the Senate, she can be a bridge in the Democratic caucus and potentially across the aisle to accomplish the promises that were made during the campaign.
All of everything you said, and also it's just like she's coming in unprecedented for like 20 different reasons. And she's got a different type of power than we've ever seen from a vice president. One, Biden has already said that's his partner versus his wingman. Like, he believes that he has said that like that's someone who could be his successor. She's got the 50-50 Senate. Like, she's got a whole bunch of people in Congress that actually support and are far more progressive than her and Biden, that hopefully will push them to be more progressive. And as we hold her accountable, because we must hold her accountability is a love language. We're in a unique position as Black people and as Black women, because we also are going to be protecting her. It's like you can hold her accountable, but also call racism and sexism out when you see it. So I think those are all valid points. Michael, I want to go back to what you were talking about with Reconstruction and the importance of us recognizing we've already been many places before. History repeats itself. And as we seek to be prepared, I mean, we are the ones who got this election. We are the ones who put Biden and Kamala there. We are the ones who have Congress looking how it looks. So as Black people, what is it we need to do next to now? Like, we did this, we did the work, we did the heavy lifting. How can we keep this energy and make sure that we are served and not like they're not eating our lunch again?
Few things, and I appreciate the question. One, I have to speak to the Kamala Harris point that I think is critical. We celebrated here in Massachusetts, Deval Patrick in 2006. First African-American governor of Massachusetts. And I think for Bithiah, I don't know if you say the same thing. I didn't think Massachusetts would vote for a Black man for governor. It shocked me. And if I had bet money on it, I would have lost all my money. Barack Obama in 2008, we celebrated. We have Black DAs, Black judges. And I just want to lift up the point that just because you're Black don't mean you always do the right thing. And we got to remember that sometimes people lack the knowledge, the awareness, or the courage to do all that we need them to do. So we have a Black DA here in Massachusetts in Suffolk County who's extremely disruptive. And she's Black. Disruption is not something everybody feels comfortable with. There's some CEOs that are disruptive right now that are Black or brown. There's some elected officials that are disruptive, and they're moving the needle on police reform or education reform. So I want to lift that up because, quite frankly, we got the Clinton crime bill under a Democrat, and a lot of Black folks signed on to that legislation. And even though Bill Clinton kind of apologizes now, and Biden kind of apologizes, or at least recognizes that it was flawed, the reality is a lot of Black folks lined up behind that bill that pipelined a lot of Black and brown men and women into prison for nonviolent drug offenses. And there were people at the time who knew it was bad policy that no one was listening to. So I say that to you as a precursor to the Biden administration. What people like about him is he works across the aisle. Working across the aisle means you got to compromise on something. So as we say here in Massachusetts, and I've heard it more across the country, if you're not at the table, you're on the table or you're on the menu. So we're glad Kamala Harris is at the table, but we need more folks at the table who have consciousness, who have a passion and a knowledge on our issues to demand that this moment, there's a justice and policing reform bill right now pending in Congress. Qualified immunity, post systems or tracking of Black police officers who commit crimes so they can't move from police department to police department, no knock warrants, all those things that we saw with Breonna Taylor and so many other people. Now, here's the true test. Black folks elected Biden. Will Biden push the policing, justice and policing bill? Because that comes at extreme political risk if he uses the nuclear option and uses that vote of Kamala Harris to push it through the Senate. Because Republicans will not want that to pass. So I just want to balance everybody here that we can celebrate, but at some point the celebrating is over, and then we got to talk real politics about whether we have the momentum in the Black and brown community with allies to demand that they pass that bill in this administration, so that we're not here protesting in 8 years about something we could have done in this administration. He's only going to have a hot minute to do something big, just so you know how politics works. 4 years, Congress changes, who knows what the next election produces with shifts in the House, the Senate. He's going to be like Barack Obama. Barack Obama did Affordable Care Act. He did American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. He tried to get it all done early. So we have a challenge. We have to hold him accountable. And I'll probably a little spin on what Shana said, my friend Shana Barnes said earlier about elections, about elected officials. I say
in here.
What's that? I say you put pressure on people who oppose your point of view and what you're asking for, but you got to give courage to those who also supposedly support you. Because just because they sign up that they support the bill don't mean they're going to speak on it from the floor, don't mean they're going to show up and mobilize their voters, don't mean they're going to lobby their colleagues. So I just want to lift that up. We got a lot of work to do. Let's not celebrate too much just because we got a Black person, and congratulations, your soror. she's going to need force behind her. It's going to be like the Verizon commercial. Whether we show up with her will matter.
Accountability and policy is a love language. Like, you got to be able to check your people that you love. That's part of loving them. And, you know, before we open it up to Q&A for the audience, I think what Michael just said lends itself to the last question, which is how can we as voters, as citizens, take better steps to make sure we're supporting progressive policies and supporting the type of accountability and policy that leads to actual justice and equitable shifts in our favor, especially when we look at the next 2 years leading up to the midterm elections and 4 years out when everything can shift just like that. Like everything, we are on a timeline, to your point.
You know, I have to build off of what Michael just said. All politics are local. Everything's local. We got to show up with the big elections. We got to show up with those small elections. We got to be elected. And we also have to form our own PACs. We have to support people when they're running. You know, I was sad that I met Brandy at the end, right? But when she sent me that note, I donated. You know, when things are happening, we've got to move on it. You know, one of the things that was interesting to me watching Mitch McConnell and Trump, right? Those boys stuck together through thick and thin. They weren't out bad-mouthing each other over here. When Trump did something outrageous, then they had a little bit of something that's not so outrageous on the back end that he could support. We have to do maneuvering for our people and around our people so they can say, like many white politicians, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, I had to do this. They kind of stuck me up and I did it. We have to start planning. We are politics. We are the vote. We're the government. And we have to create these PACs, these movements behind them, and making sure that our elected officials then carry it out. And if you don't carry it out, I don't need to be public with my consequences, but you know there will be consequences, whether it's my money, whether it's me in your face, but we don't have to always admonish people out loud. You know, one of the things that I found very interesting watching Trump and those white boys, they weren't loud about it, but you knew at one point he had to go. Whenever Mitch McConnell said Black Lives Matter, I was like, that's the end of Trump. Because Mitch McConnell's money told him Trump has gone overboard. He didn't criticize Trump. He didn't say anything. He was like, I must just send this warning shot out that he's done. We have to get together and be able to do that. We have to create the dynamics to make sure that not only accountability, we're holding people accountable, but they know there are consequences to this not happening. And I think Mike said it really beautifully. We got to know what's on the table. What policies before us? What's happening in Black maternal health? What's happening with our refund the criminal reform bills? What's happening in our education bills? Our education is dismal. We have to start educating ourselves, then sending the people to Washington and holding them accountable. I cannot say more about that because that is such an individual thing that all of us have the power to do.
Brandy?
Yeah, I was just saying, Bithiah read my mind when she said all politics are local, because that's literally the thought when she came off mute that I had in my mind. And so I definitely support all that she said. And I just can't emphasize enough, if you look at past voting records, and I'm sure Bithiah has the stats ready to drop any second, we often show up for federal elections. We don't show up in those in between. We don't show up when there's the special election. I'll never forget in 2013, living here in my district in the 12th Suffolk, I voted 6 times that year because we had the mayoral election, we had a special election for our senator, we had to elect our new state rep, and I felt like I was going to the polls with my mother every 2 months. Why? Because my mother would go to the polls with my grandma, who had to take a poll test to exercise her right to vote. So I don't have an option to not vote like other people do. And I say that to say we have to show up in the meantime. To Michael's point, yes, we can celebrate, but that's why we're having this conversation, because we know the party can't last for 4 years. We have to get to work. And so one of the resources that I shared with the organizers of this event is there is a local organization. It is very grassroots, called #EnoughMA. And it's basically Black people across Massachusetts trying to organize and create a local agenda to hold elected officials accountable to. And I put the link to their website on there. One of the co-founders is my constituent here in the 12th Suffolk, lives just on the other side of Blue Hill Ave here in Mattapan. So like local, homegrown, all of that. Encourage y'all to get involved. When I ran for office, I didn't know the pandemic was going to be the pandemic. Campaigns cost a lot of money. My mom will share her story, how she was taught to vote but not to give to candidates, and just realized that in the last 5 years, and she'll be 69 in the month of March. And so my fundraising director was a Black woman, and she said, Brandy, when I'm done supporting you, I'm going to start a Black PAC. But we actually don't have to wait for her to start a Black PAC. Like, money talks, and we spend our money. I'll never forget the statistic. I learned it back in the early 2010s, which basically we hold the less percentage of wealth in this country, but are the #1 spenders. So it's not a question of we don't have the resource and the capital. It's a question of where are we investing and spending it? Where are we using our dollars? And so I just want to encourage everyone to get involved locally. Mary, you'll get an email for it, but I'll drop the link in a second in the chat so you have it accessible right away. And that's all I got to say on that.
And Michael had our, Bithiah, did you have something you wanted to add?
You never had that stat for what she was saying. So, you know, when we look at voter turnout, big elections, right? 60, 70% of us voting, it goes down, it drops off significantly for midterm. You're down to 50%. Most of the time we're in the 50%. We can't do that. We cannot do that. And we got to give money. We've got to support people when that envelope comes to us so she can run and she can win.
So our first question actually comes from our amazing panelist, Michael Curry, and it's a great question. It's about gun ownership. And I want to take it back even before Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna and the terrorist attack earlier this month. There were already reports when the pandemic started and people had to go inside that for the first time in years, liberals, people who said that they were against having guns in their homes, like gun sales went up, and it was all types of, it wasn't one kind of person buying guns. It was like all kinds of people. But given what we just saw with the terrorist attack and what we know, I mean, Trump made it very clear in his parting words that it's not over. So, you know, knowing what we know, are people starting to buy guns? Are they changing? Are people changing their minds on guns? You know, have you thought about gun ownership? I think that's a great question. Thanks for that question, Michael.
You know, that's a funny question. My people are from Mississippi, and they own guns. They did. And I think the moment Black people start owning guns, all of a sudden we're gonna get some gun laws. You know, this is my favorite story. And you know, you all know I love Jesus, but I do cuss a little. And I think right when, you know, the white people went to Richmond and they were marching and spitting in people's face, there was a Black militia group that came up. And I think they were called the NFACs, and you can look up what that means if you want to, but they were not, it was called the Not Effing Around Anymore Coalition. And you can look them up. No one on television posted their story. It was like the revolution would not be televised. You had to be able to read to find them. And I found it fascinating because they went right up in Stone Mark. You know, the women all had their hair braided, and it was braided tight to the head. They had their guns and they were ready. Those white people didn't mess with them. They didn't come out. They didn't say a word. And I've got to be honest, you know, I've talked to my Jack and Jill sisters, and we're thinking about going to the gun range soon. And we were like, so what does this mean? Because I think if we're going to play these games, then let's play them fair. And you can't tell me I need to sit like a sitting duck while you're carrying around a gun with a flag in your pickup truck. So, you know, I come from people who own guns. My Aunt Lois would have a gun in her purse in Cleveland. And I have to tell you, Mike, I'm thinking about it. I am really thinking about it, especially after what are they called? The Not Effing Around Anymore coalition. I might start a chapter here in Massachusetts.
If I could, and I'm feeling you, but if I can, I'm going to suggest people watch, and I just watched it this week, 3.5 minutes and 10 bullets, the documentary on Jordan Davis. You gotta watch that documentary. I mean, and again, folks only know some stories, right? You may not know DJ Henry's story. You should know that story too. But Jordan Davis is one. Ahmaud Arbery's story, and knowing the details. Think about what it means when hundreds of people storm the US Capitol violently. Most of them didn't even cover their faces, fighting hand to hand with police officers, storming through offices while they videotape each other. I just want you to take that in for a second. While they videotape each other, you have to have a blatant disregard for the criminal justice system. You must know that you're gonna get away with it. So I say that kind of brazen criminality, that kind of brazen crime is what a lot of people have in them right now. It's hate. It's a bitterness towards the people that are coming into their country, that they're afraid of the Mexicans raping their all this stuff that Donald Trump has created about us, those Black and brown folks. You now have people willing to act. So I don't want to terrify people by saying that, but it's real. And then you have these Jordan Davis kind of situations where these Black folks in a road rage incident, or in his case, turn your music down. And he emptied his gun into a car with some kids in it. So I think we just need to take that in. I just got my gun. You know, I did my thing here in Brockton, took my class, went and got my gun, bought me a gun. And I'm going to tell you, it was hard for me because I grew up in a community where people died at the hands of guns. I have friends that are dead right now. I have 2 nephews, and I want to say 2 nephews that were murdered by guns. So I was always that dude was like, nah, I want to touch that. Nah, I'm good. And then I decided one day that if I ever needed to defend my family, if I ever needed to defend myself, my Black tax that I put on myself about, okay, I have crime in our neighborhood, so I can't purchase a gun, will put me in a position to not even to be able to defend my family. When in fact, not all white families, but many of them have caches of weapons. I went into the gun store, 5 of the guys on the counter had Make America Great Again hats and got even louder when I walked in. And then started talking about how many guns they had. I have 20, I have 25. And it was all for me. It was all a show to let me know that they are armed. And I say that because it's not a choice everybody can make, but it's a Second Amendment right. And I agree with you, Bithiah. The day we make a run on guns, they'll change the laws.
And Mike, I have to say one more thing. We saw the practice to the Capitol in Richmond when they went to the State House. We saw it in Michigan. They went to the State House again. They had practice runs. And why are you afraid when it's your cousin? Why are you afraid when it's your nephew? They let you into the Capitol. Can you imagine one of us, even in pearls, walking into the Capitol and breaking a glass?
And
even
how many people arrested? 68 people or so arrested the day of, and they could walk out? Hell no.
And I'm holding,
hell no would we have survived that altercation.
No. And I'm holding white women accountable too, because we often think of this as male only. Each one of those men have a wife, have a mother, has a sister, and most of them were there. So we need to talk about this as a holistic thing. And this is not just them, but it's a third of Massachusetts as well.
I want to hear Brandy's answer, and I have something I want to add to it. But before that, I want to remind the audience, like, we're open for questions and we're running out of time. So if you have questions, definitely put them in the chat so I can make sure that we get to them. You know, as a Black journalist, I've had my life directly threatened, not just the general threats the Globe gets, but I've had like my life personally threatened. Before I worked here, when I was in the Kansas City Star, I had my life threatened twice, and I had my life threatened recently. And all this time, my dad is a gun owner. He's been wanting me to have a gun. And it really wasn't until recently that I was just like, okay, you know what? My book club all went together to a shooting range, to a Black-owned shooting range. My book club's in DC. And they're like, oh, Jenee, you got to come down. The next time you come home to visit your family, like we got to go, we got to get you a gun. And I'm now like seriously thinking about it, because I'm just like, there's people out there that really want to kill me, that are working hard to get my personal information to harm me. And there are people like the people we saw who stormed the Capitol, and that is our right. And I do absolutely believe the gun control we want to see, that some of us have been fighting for, will happen when all the Black people have guns, because the NRA is not about to stand up for us. But Brandy, please share your thoughts.
Yeah, so this is something that I have been debating for probably a year and a half now, just thinking about all the unarmed shootings of Black people in this country, but also thinking about, to Bithiah's point about practice. Yeah, those are the practice rounds, but white people have been practicing for this insurrection in camps. Like if this whole world shuts down, right? If we're in a Octavia Butler type situation, if you read her novels, our people are not prepared. There are folks who are prepared. They got their guns. They know how to survive. They know what berries to pick in the bushes, things we used to know. But again, we were chasing other folks' dreams, so we lost our own history and lineage. And so I just say that to say, for me, I absolutely considered it. Once Biden won, and my mom looked at me like I was crazy. I was like, yo, we need to go get this cash out the ATM. Your passport, where is it? We got to have a go bag. Because just in case they do what they did after Reconstruction, we are not going to get caught here. Like, I made sure our tanks were filled with gas. I took down my signs that I had in the lawn. My Anna Presley sign at my mom's house, at my house for my own campaign was like, we don't want them to know we're Black, even though we're in Mattapan. They probably think we're Black. Like, I'm thinking of all the ways to hide. And I got to the point where it was like, I've been raised on, nonviolent, but at the end of the day, I can't bring a stick to a gunfight, right? Which essentially is where I'm at right now, because I don't have the means to protect myself, should anything happen, or my mom for that matter. So day in and day out, I consider it more and more. I've been to the gun range before, some with my sorority sisters, other times with my homeboys, always had a good time. And also, one of my dear friends who is from St. Louis but lives in Mississippi got her gun license and purchase a year ago and became a member of the NRA, because to Bithiah's point, she was like, if we all have guns, they're going to change these laws. And if that's all it takes to change the laws, then I'll do my part and get a gun. So yes, I've thought about it. And I have a constituent who actually wants to teach our young people how to manage guns and legally, and like all Black people, just so we're prepared for whenever the next phase of this revolution comes. Because too often we think the federal government's going to protect us, right? Like as a people, we think like, oh, that's who's going to have our back, or the police won't let that happen if we abide by the rules. But I think January 6th was a wake-up call. No, it's not about abiding by the rules. It's truly about the skin that you're in. So that's where I'm at.
So we have a few questions before Nancy wraps us up and we say goodnight. I would ask that, instead of everybody answering the question, just somebody decide to take the question, because we have so many. I'm just going to read all of the questions and then people can take them. The first one is, what would you recommend younger people do in order to be involved? And how can we encourage others to understand the importance of taking action alongside us? The next one is, what is the most effective way to fight white supremacy on a local level? One we kind of talked about a little bit, which is holding elected officials accountable, even when we don't vote against them. Like, we were going to vote for Kamala once it was clear that was the path. But just because we were going to vote for her, does that mean, we can't hold her accountable? So it's like, how are we going to hold people accountable that are likely to get our vote, is that question. And what are some ways you would recommend younger people get involved in organizations and groups collaborating on the work that needs to be done that people can join? Anyone can answer any one of those questions.
I'll just say briefly on a local level, and Shayna, who I think may have had to leave the call already, talked about this from her vantage point, working for a congressperson. Reach out to their offices. I have been in office for 3.5 weeks, and the people who have reached out to me for advocacy, 100% minus one. Okay, so I guess that's 95%, have been white. The people who reach out to me for assistance and help, 100% have been people of color. And I share that to say, when I was an advocate on the other side of the state house, one state rep told me, oh, on average, we only get 4 phone calls about an issue. 4 people to pick up the phone and to say, oh, I care about this, do it this way, for them to move. And so I just think social media is cool, but old school methods still work the best when it comes to politics. So writing letters, calling your elected officials, letting them know what it is you want them to do is critically important. And something that was shared in my small group was also to reach out to your elected officials who aren't your own, those who oppose the issue, to put pressure on them to do so as well.
Did I hear my name mentioned? I walked away for 2 minutes. I thought I heard my name.
I did mention your name, Shayna. I was saying, can you share on a federal level how often someone calls the office for a particular issue? Like what's the number to move the needle, if you will? I was just sharing at the State House, it's about 4 to 7 people. So I was just curious if you could share from the federal vantage point.
Sure. So technically, I guess short answer is there really is no number. It kind of is just the frequency of the volume, I guess. So, and I mean, if people flood, the offices, the multiple offices with their issues and things that they have, we always, actually in our office, we always send them down to DC, especially if it's a legislative issue, we send it down to DC for consideration and for the congressman to look at it. But what I was mentioning in the small group is a lot of people call, and it's great that people call their congressman. I get it. And let me just back up. I actually worked for Congressman Lynch in the 8th Congressional District. But when they call on an issue that we already support. So it's kind of just like, okay, I'm with you, and I agree with them, and they're really passionate, and sometimes they're really angry, and they're just like, why didn't this and why didn't that? It's just like, I don't know. You have to call their office and find out why so-and-so did or didn't do such a thing. So that's what I mentioned in there, in the accountability piece. That's what we spoke about, and my sister Helen over here spoke about the accountability and making sure that, if you're going to vote for someone, to make them earn that vote, but also make the people that didn't earn your vote be accountable for what they're supposed to do. That's who you call when you have an issue. And if your particular representative is in support of it, like I think Michael said, and Representative Brandy said, support them saying, yes, thank you so much for supporting this, but also get on the people that don't. Don't call us to say that someone else doesn't support it. There's nothing we can do about that. That's what the individual responsibility is. And the individual accountability is to try to persuade the other side to make sure that they do the right thing and they stand on the right side of history. So that's pretty much what I was sharing from our point of view. And it's kind of frustrating because people want to share their opinions so much, and I know they do, but it's the wrong audience. Know your audience and know who you're talking to, and get a coalition together also. That's also good. Yeah, for now. Okay.
And then just to add to Shayna, Jenee, that I think is important. A lot of people like to have opinions and comment on social media, but they're not doing the work. And I'm going to tell you how important it is that you join the Urban League, the NAACP, whatever organization is doing work in your community. Because sometimes, organization can be strong in one community and weak in another. But the reality is, if they're weak, you need to get involved and make them strong. I want to remind people that the progress we've made came from great struggle. It came from people like myself and Bithiah and Brandy and Shayna, who got involved in stuff. You got to deal with the drama of our own people, fighting each other, arguing in meetings. I don't care if that's the church or the civil rights organization, but you fought through that because you were also pushing the city council to do right by our kids. Or you fought through that because you're going to bring a housing suit in Boston against discrimination against Black parents who wanted to live in any community they wanted to live in. Or you went after them on how they treated us in the hospital and they gave us unequal treatment. The Institute of Medicine report in 2002. But you got to do the work. It just can't be a group conversation where you are. We need you at the city council hearing, at the congressional hearing, at the state legislative hearing, with the school committee. We need you at the boardroom, the ERG. You got to show up wherever you are and be that change. If you don't, then we don't get there. And I want to, Letters from a Birmingham Jail. If you've never read it, read Dr. King's Letter from a Birmingham Jail. There is great stress and conflict that comes with this work. And that's why I posted Frederick Douglass's quote, "Without struggle, there's no progress." We have to remember that this work requires struggle and that the benefit is for your children.
Before we close it to Nancy, I have one last question because we are running short on time. And it's from Felisa. Can you talk about ways in which we can get young people involved? And I mean not just people who are old enough to vote, people who aren't old enough to vote, high school students, like how can we get them involved? And can we talk about the vital role that mentorship plays? And how we need to create more access for mentors that look like our Black and brown children in schools. So let's definitely, I think that's a beautiful way to end the evening, talking about the importance of cultivating our future leaders and being there for them, how they both get involved and how we can be there for them.
If I can just start with that, Jenee, and then I'd love for Bithiah and Michael to share as well. I actually don't want to put the ownership on our young people. I think that as a community of Black professionals, and I mean professionals in the broadest sense, we have done a disservice of not showing our young people what pathways are available to them. Too often for our community, our children think that the only way they can get out the hood, and putting that on quotes because don't want anyone to leave, but is to be an engineer, a lawyer, or a doctor, or to be a rapper or a professional athlete, because that's what they see in the latter two. And in the first three, that's what they told make money, without recognizing the debt that's associated, particularly with being a lawyer or the medical profession. We don't tell our children about the trades and that you could actually make more than 6 figures being a laborer on a construction site. We don't tell... Sorry, I thought my phone was on Do Not Disturb. We do not tell our young people that they actually have the opportunity to be nurses. We don't tell them about the jobs that are available with associate's degree, without a degree, or with just a 4-year degree. And I think too often we forget. We do our lives, we live our lives, we have our children, we have our partners, we're trying to make our careers. And so to the extent that we can leverage our professional organizations, whether it's a sorority, your church, to actually be in schools, to support the school. What if every Black church in Massachusetts adopted a school? What do you think might happen in that situation? How might our community be different as a result? And so that's one way that I think we can be better mentors, is we have to be more visible for our young people and tell them our pathway, how we've gotten to where we are, and the paths that are available to them.
Brandy, I think you're spot on, and Leanne knows how much I love her, and we've had this conversation. Our children are looking, there are a couple of things, the whole language of bougie, or whatever that means. We do not tell our children that being middle class is Black, being upper middle class is Black. We allow white people, through big brothers, big sisters, through all of it, to be the mentors to our children that we should be. And we got to take that back. That goes back to shaping our image about us and our community. I want to go back to even how I started with juvenile justice. I spent 2 years going to 425 Harvard Street every Monday to work with girls who were in Spectrum, I believe. And I was the only person that showed up. If we had churches that visited every child that's in the juvenile lockup, how amazing would that be? That child will come out of that system knowing that they're connected to our community. This summer, I worked with Freedom House. The day after Rep. Lewis died, and so we decided we have a curriculum for philanthropy. We go in, we're talking about John Lewis. Those kids looked at me like, who is John Lewis? I have no idea what you're talking about. I was stunned. And so we have to go to them. We have to go to their after school programs. We have to go to their schools. We have to bring them with us, whether they're your child or not. We have to be there showing up. And a program we had again with some high schoolers, this little girl, this Black girl told me to my face, I don't have anything in common with you. She told me she had more in common with a white person from South Boston than she had with me. So you know what kind of tongue lashing she got from me. And we still talk about that today. Like, how dare you tell me that? She said, I don't see people like you. I'm like, you're seeing me now and you're gonna see me the rest of your life. But we have to show up in the flesh. And again, we have to change our mindset, how we see our kids. Every 57,000 of those BPS students belong to us. We have to be there for them. I don't care who their parents are. We have to take this on. Mentorship is about showing up, being there, being available, and we have to figure out how do we do it in a way that we're not penalizing, we're not criticizing, but we're there to learn and hear and be with and walk with as well.
You are absolutely right. And Michael, I want you to go ahead and say your piece, because we're almost at 9 o'clock and we haven't brought Nancy on to say bye. And I also want to say to Felisa, thank you for that question, and please be empowered. And anyone who isn't old enough to vote now, know you matter and your voice still matters, and there's still work you can do out in the community, and people who love you who will help you do that work. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, quick comment. I would say, and I say this every time I give a speech around the country, I say there's a little Black girl in Roxbury right now, or Southside Chicago, or North Minneapolis, that's meant to find a cure for cancer, but will never know who she is, because she's internalized that racism, because she doesn't have academic rigor in her school, because she doesn't have mentors. And that is a price we all pay, no matter what color we are, right? No matter where you are in the world, when talent gets left on the table because of racism. And the reality is we got to find ways to make sure that those little Black girls and those little Black boys get what they need to be what we need them to be. Right now, we're on the brink of having our first Black mayor in the city of Boston. It'll happen by default because Mayor Walsh will go on to work Secretary of Labor. Kim Janey will be mayor. 200 mayors in the history of this city. 200 in the history of a city. We've never had a woman or a person of color. We have to take that in about talent and how we leave talent. We could have new perspectives on transportation, on equity, on justice, on housing, and on education, but we've never allowed a man, a woman of color, a man of color to ever lead this city. So we have a challenge to start getting those young people ready. And then one last thing, Jenee, which is you got to train them. I don't want to wait on the next Ayanna Pressley or Nancy Russo or Rachel Rollins or Bithiah Carter. We have to train them now. All the things we need them to know to be the leaders we need them to be. And we need to teach them ethics, the issues that we fall into around money and all the impropriety, all the things that people do to get them in trouble. Teach them how to deal with the media, how to stand confidently, how to lead. We can't wait on this to happen by accident. We got to train them.
Thank you so much, everybody. This has been amazing. Nancy, please come on and close us out. It's 9 o'clock and I hope all of y'all ate dinner, but I have not. Thank you. This was an amazing night. Nancy, where you at?
I'm here. First, I just need to echo a couple of sentiments and say that the panelists, I mean, as always, you did not disappoint. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I think I can say that everyone who attended is probably really thinking about now how to get involved. Jenee, I also want to say thank you to you for leading this discussion this evening. I really appreciate that you joined us, and I hope this won't be the last time. A couple of things that I'd like to just lift up, and you know, I'll make this brief because I know that we're bordering, oh, actually it's after 9 o'clock. Making this brief, I do want to lift up that a couple of things that were said in summation, and I thought that were key points to take away. One is the formation of PACs and really supporting our elected officials, those that are interested in, as well as those that are interested in running for office. I think making sure that we keep in mind that it's important to know what legislation's on the table. It's important for us to make sure that we hold elected officials accountable. I think one of the gems in particular was just being reminded that we often do not show up for the unpopular elections, if you will. We don't show up for special elections. We don't typically show up for midterm elections. And one of the things to just keep in mind is that over the next 2 years, participating in those elections are going to be absolutely critical as we think about what we really want the new administration to be held accountable for. So I just wanted to lift up those points. Vote, vote, vote. I think that may have gone without saying, but I said it anyway. Just to draw your attention, all of these resources were mentioned except for one. They're here. We want to make sure that you are aware of the various organizations that are involved in local politics, as well as just really focused on making sure that we are paying attention to disparities, making sure that we're paying attention to racism, sexism, and all the other issues that Black people face in our communities. So I just wanted to share that. And I'm actually not going to close us out this evening. I have the privilege of introducing my soror, Jacqueline Jones, for the rest of y'all, to close us out this evening. So Jacqueline.
Thank you. I will be brief. I've learned from Baptist ministers, you don't hold people too long. But I wanted to say, again, just adding my thank you to the panel, but also to let everyone know that this event was brought to you by the Southeastern Mass, as well as Cape and Islands chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, that's Psi Iota Omega. And if you would like to know more about us, please make sure that you check us out through our social media. So we're on the web, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. That way you'll keep in touch with us and also know more about things that we're planning to do with civic engagement. This committee tonight, the Connections Committee, that is our social action as well as civic engagement, not only of the local level, but that's for our national organization. So each chapter has a committee. And we just like to say, as we close out, that tonight is the night for you to begin to do the work. We hope that each of you heard something through the panelists or through the comments, through the discussion, something that is going to help you become more engaged, more civically involved. What is it? What is your next? What is that action step? And I would say, again, if you decide that you might want to go to a Board of Selectmen's meeting, to a town council, to City Hall, sometimes just us being there can change the dynamic. So please make sure that you find some way to get